Chana, and children. Mendel is the author of several popular Jewish-themed books and has written hundreds of articles on Jewish thought. His books and writings have been translated into Hebrew, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, and French. It is my honor to welcome Rabbi Mendel Kלמסון to deliver this year's keynote address.
The air is thin in Cusco, Peru. The walls are even thinner. That's how I overheard that unforgettable exchange one bitter evening. It was bedtime at the home of Ofer and Yael, the Chabad shluchim who had made Cusco their home. Little Racheli was being tucked in for the night. Her sweet voice was fading as she recited the bedtime Shema. Ima, she suddenly said earnestly. Ken, Motek. Yes, my dear, a tired but loving voice returned. Matai chozrim habaita. When are we going back home? Asked the young child, who found herself far away from her loving family back in Israel. Yael's answer, all three words of it, will forever define for me the thing we call shlichus, that transformative idea that has revolutionized the contemporary Jewish landscape. Kan ze habayit chamuda. Here is home, precious. Oh, the child responded softly. It wasn't an oh of resignation, the oh you'd expect from a resistant little girl who had just been told that everything she had ever assumed would remain permanent had now become temporary, and everything she had previously considered temporary was now permanent. It was an oh of realization, of a 4-year-old experiencing her very first aha moment, of a child redefining the place she called home. I'd almost forgotten about that exchange. By now I was married with 3 little ones of my own. And by now I too had joined the Rebbe's army and had taken up a posting in central London, not a stone's throw away from Buckingham Palace. But then it came back to me one night at bedtime as I was tucking my son into bed. His sleepy voice sang the Shema with strains of a confused American gone British accent. Suddenly he sat upright. What followed next was the same exchange that I imagine takes place between a unique regiment of courageous parents and their brave young children, between shluchim, shluchos, and shluchalach all around the world, be it in the mountains of Nepal, the rainforests of the Congo, or the plains of Montana. Tati, my usually impish son, said earnestly. I sensed what was coming before it came, the burning declaration before it was made. Tati, I want to go back home. For a moment that felt like an eternity, I was frozen in silence, trapped in a memory, transported to a cold Cusco evening and a conversation overheard. We are home, Ziskait, I heard myself say. Tayir Shluchim, dear friends, according to the Hasidic masters, this is the story of our lives, of our history, and of creation itself. Prior to its earthly journey, our soul resides in the spiritual realms, absorbing divine light, until it is selected for an essential mission on earth. Fearing the dissonance of our olam hafuch, our inverse reality, where the temporary is considered permanent and the permanent temporary, the soul resists, only to then forget its source upon arrival. Throughout its earthly stay, it has moments of spiritual recall, what we might coin deja vu moments, when it suddenly remembers its spiritual essence and calls out to God, Matai chozrim habaita? When can I come home? If you listen carefully during those moments, you can hear God softly whispering back, Kan ze habayit. Here is home. All of Chabad philosophy can be understood as an elucidation of these 3 words, embodying the counterintuitive truth articulated in the Midrash, that of all the realms God could have chosen to call home, He chose ours, the lowest and most material of worlds. In other words, this world is not a dressing room, but the main stage where the cosmic purpose of creation plays out. Kan ze habayit. And what is true of the greater world is true of our inner world. Perhaps more than any period in living memory, the message of Kan ze habayit speaks to our current reality, when so much of what we considered permanent in our lives has been rendered temporary almost overnight. Because more than just a place, home is a feeling. It's the feeling of safety and stability. It's the warm embrace of the familiar. How many times over the past months have we thought in deep frustration, when will this period of insecurity and uncertainty finally come to an end? When will we be able to return to that state of inner peace we call home? Matai chozrim habayta. And here too, if we listen carefully, we might hear God's gentle invitation, Kan ze habayit. Here too is where I want you to build my home. I want to be part of your life, not only b'shiftecha b'veisecha, when you settle down and have arrived, but even and especially b'lechtecha b'derech, when you're on the road, in every step of life's journey, during periods of disruption, of disorientation and depletion. In the words of the Rebbe to a young man who was struggling to live purposefully during a difficult period of transition. During the 40 years the Jews wandered the wilderness, they would sometimes stay in a place for just one day, yet they would go through the tremendous trouble of setting up the Mishkan sanctuary every single time. This teaches us that every single one of our stations in life is significant unto itself. There is something in every place or situation to be sanctified, something that can serve as an ohel moed, a tent of meeting between heaven and earth. Isn't that the lesson Yaakov Avinu learned while on the run during one of the most traumatic and turbulent days of his life? Achen yesh Hashem b'mokim hazeh v'anochi lo yadati. Ein zeh ki im beis Elokim v'zeh shar hashamayim. Indeed, the Lord is even in this unlikely place, and I did not know it. And isn't Kan ze habayit what the Torah is teaching us by calling Yosef ish matzliach, the only individual the Torah ever describes as a man of success? Not as the mighty viceroy of Egypt, but as a powerless, isolated slave and prisoner. Because success is not measured by your arrivals, but by how you deal with the challenges along the way. Do you see 2020 as a waste of a year? Or do you recognize the unique opportunities it affords us to bring God into our homes? For home is more than just a place. It's a state of mind. It's a way of being. Home is not just where you live, but how you live. It's where you invest everything you do, wherever, whatever, whenever, however, and with whomever, with a sense of presence, purpose, and providence. It's where soul-crushing questions like what if, or if only, or why me are replaced with an intentional and empowered what can I do? It's where deviations become destinations, where wastelands become wonderlands, and where pit stops become promised lands. Machdal Eretz Yisrael. The paradigm of Kan ze habayit, the profound sense that there is divine purpose in every experience, is how setbacks become springboards, how breakdowns become breakthroughs, and how difficulties become destinies. It's knowing with every fiber of your being that Hashem is right here, right now. With this consciousness, every thought, every word, every deed exposes our mundane material world for the glorious divine garden that it is. Which brings us back to where it all began. The 10th day of Shvat, 1951, 770 Eastern Parkway. A small group of Hasidim were huddled together, anxiously waiting to hear their Rebbe's first words. In his inaugural address, the Rebbe shared the midrashic account of how God chose this world as his garden, Basi Lagani, but subsequently withdrew into exile. Whenever the Rebbe would share the next part of the story, he would choke up with emotion, crying from the very depths of his being, Shchinto bigalusa! God has been exiled for thousands of years and yearns to return home. Matai chozrim habaita? When, my dear children, will you welcome me back home? The Rebbe devoted his every waking moment to answering that question. That was the essence and the urgency at the heart of the Rebbe's mission, to transform our imperfect world into a place of goodness and divine awareness. Ve'idach pirushahu, and all else is commentary. Each one of us has an integral part to play. We are no longer waiting for Mashiach. Mashiach is waiting for us. One person, one mitzvah, one day and one home at a time, until we can stand proudly and together with Malkeinu B'Reishenu and declare with joy, Tayere, Zise, Vater in Himmel, Kan Ze Habayit. Welcome home once and for all.